This is what the yard looks like prior to being overseeded. I'm not actually sure which kind of zoysia it is, but what I've got is some Zenith Zoysia that I'm gonna put down and overseed it with, and then I'm gonna lay peat moss on top. This all initially started with me trying to fill in some of the bare spots in my yard, like this one here. You can see that seed took well, but I did have some other spots that didn't fill in very well, like over here, and the seeds haven't really grown quite as much yet. So I'm gonna lay more seed across all of these, but especially in these bare spots, as well as the whole rest of the front yard. And then I'll cover it with peat moss to ensure that 100% seed to soil contact. So this is what one of those 2-pound bags of zoysia will get you. It's basically a single spreader worth. So I'm gonna spread it probably on about a 3 or so pattern, since I'm just overseeding for the most part out here, but we'll see. I'll let you know how it goes. So here's how the peat moss spreader comes in a box like this from Amazon. Not too bad. This is I think the 16-inch version. There's ultimately what it looks like. Peat moss spreader, you can also use it for compost. And then here's basically the pieces put together. So that's how big it is right there, not too bad at all. So there's obviously much bigger versions which will spread the peat moss faster. What I went with, it was about $70 on Amazon. And now we're gonna put it together. All right, so here it is finished. It took me about an hour, I can't believe it. I thought it would be like 10 minutes, but these things are quite a pain to get screwed on and get bent and get all the holes to line up. And then of course the directions are terrible. It doesn't tell you anywhere as to where to use any of the washers. They don't fit on half the nuts and screws, and it comes with an extra set of nuts, but there's no place to use them. They don't fit on these screws. So you just got to kind of figure it out, and the directions are useless. So now we'll fill it up and time to use it. So we got all the seed laid down across the yard. I finally got this peat moss spreader, compost spreader all put together. You see how it's got that little latch that just opens up and you fill it with the peat moss. And then here's what I'm going with for the peat moss. Organic, comes in 3 cubic feet. It's a pretty big sized bale, and then I'll just cut that open and put that right into the peat moss spreader. So to cut it open, what I recommend is just doing a big X like this across it, and then that cuts a nice big opening that you then can get a transfer shovel in there. Transfer shovel didn't work too well, just because the peat moss can be kind of hard breaking it up. So just using a normal shovel here, and then transferring that right over to the spreader. And then once it gets pretty full, I'll go ahead and close it off. So now to close it here, you're just gonna close this up like this, and then we're gonna put the latch on it and buckle that down, and then the latch on this side and buckle that down, and then I think she's ready to go. All right, so I just finished making that first run, and you can see what's left in here is basically a lot of sticks and other stuff that I don't necessarily want in the yard. So that's pretty cool. The spreader stops all that from getting out into the yard. Obviously there's some bigger parts of dirt in there that I could use. I just have to smash them up if I want to use them. But it's nice that all the sticks don't get in there. And then it lays down a pretty decent little trail of peat moss. Not incredibly thick, but as I water it in, it's going to really help those seeds germinate. All right, just to show you, because on the video it may not look like it's actually laying down very much from that angle, but here you can see this is where it's all laid down for the most part, and then there's where it's not. You see all the grass seed down there. So it puts just a nice little bed, maybe a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch thick of peat moss right on top. Might have to go over it twice, especially in the more bare areas with more seed. But all in all, I think it's doing a pretty good job. You can see the difference. All right, I'm done. I just did the whole yard with the top dressing of peat moss. And I think it went decently okay. This thing actually did work pretty well once I figured out the key thing. So what happened is, as I was rolling, these nuts kept backing off. And there's no lock washers they gave you that would fit on there. And the nuts that I thought went on there, because the directions are so terrible, kept backing off. So these are the nuts that have a little bit of that blue kind of silicone on the inside, or rubber if you will, that are just essentially a locking nut. And so that ended up fixing the problem, and since I changed those out, and they did come with it, since I changed those out, I had no problem. But prior to that, they kept backing off. One thing I would say that I don't necessarily love about this one is the size, which is a 16-inch compost or peat moss roller. Really easy to store it if you wanted to, easy to maneuver around, but you got to constantly refill it. I was getting about maybe 2 passes there and back using this per filling of the drum here. It took me about an hour to do the whole yard, which is about 2,500 square feet or so. So that may be something. This was the smallest one I could find. There's lots of bigger ones, 24 inches and even way bigger than that. So that's a consideration. Ended up using about 5 of those 3 cubic foot peat moss bales. So about 15 cubic feet or so of peat moss bales to cover the yard. Again, that's about a 2,500 square foot yard. So you can do the math there based on your yard size. That was pretty much going over everything once. I could have gone over everything twice, which probably would have been ideal, but I just didn't want to make it too deep, and I didn't have any more peat moss and didn't want to head back to the store today. So here we are the day after I laid down all of the peat moss, and everything is getting watered in pretty well, which is one of the most important steps. You need to make sure it gets a healthy amount of water. That kind of depends on what type of grass it is and where you live. Personally, I've been running these 4 times a day, ideally in the morning and early evening for about 15 minutes, just to ensure that the grass is getting enough water to get the seeds to germinate. That worked really well for the seeds I laid a couple weeks ago. So don't forget to water the grass. I'm going to do that for about 3 or 4 weeks until I really see the new seeds start to grow and take off. It's been about 10 days since I laid down the zoysia seed with the peat moss on top, and you can see the new blades are coming in pretty good now. Getting ready to fertilize it here, probably in a couple more days. But I do have a little bit of a problem, especially since I've been watering it so much, so now it's ripe for weeds. I've got this, which is I think a type of lawn leaf is kind of the common name, showing that popping up, and it really likes wet soil. I've got this, which is a spurge, which I'll have to take these out with a herbicide. And I've got this, which I think is a type of sedge. Again, a herbicide post-emergent should take care of these, but something I'm gonna have to fight through. All in all, though, the seeds are coming out pretty well, and the new growth is coming in pretty well in most of the spots. This is the seed from the grass I planted about 5 weeks ago. You see it's coming in really nice. It's really lush, and I'm happy with that so far. Let's go take a look at some of the seed that I planted about 3 weeks ago. This is the seed I laid about 3 weeks ago, and as you can see, it's sprouting pretty well. But both of these spots could benefit from some fertilizer. So let's go take a look at the fertilizer I got, and we'll talk about how to spread it. So I have this bag of Lesco 8-10-10 fertilizer, and you see that it's palm and tropical ornamental fertilizer here. That's nice and all, but what really matters is the 8-10-10, which is the amount of NPK, and you can see the ingredients right here. The total amount of nitrogen, phosphate, and soluble potash. That's the NPK. So nitrogen, phosphate, and soluble potash, otherwise known as potassium. And then here's the directions on it. Nothing too complicated for it. I'm going to talk about how we need to measure out how to apply it and when to apply it. In this situation, all these directions on the left side of this basically apply to shrubs and plants, but not for lawns. And then obviously the other handling instructions. Now this is a 50-pound bag. We'll talk about why that's important here in just 1 second. So we do want to double check that this is a 50-pound bag, because we're going to have a way to measure how many pounds we take out of the bag. So I've just got a normal bathroom scale here, and let's go ahead and put the bag on and see how much it weighs. And you see it weighs 48.4 pounds. So pretty much the 50 pounds that the bag says it weighs.
So for example, let's take this 100-pound bag of fertilizer. It's got some numbers listed on the front, which are the NPK values. That's the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is essential and also helps make the grass green. Phosphorus helps the roots grow for newly seeded grass. Potassium has micro and macronutrients that keep the grass healthy, especially in the winter months. The 8-10-10 on this bag means this bag is made up of 8% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, and 10% potassium, and 72% of whatever else they put in fertilizer. There's 3 methods you can use to figure out how much fertilizer to apply. Method 1 is figuring out how many pounds of the fertilizer you want to apply per 1,000 square foot using the NPK values. Method 2 is where you convert the percent of nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium to a decimal format. And the third method is called spoon feeding, using the decimal amount of the nitrogen, or whatever NPK value you're measuring. Method 1. Nitrogen is what we care about in this case, so we're going to measure off of nitrogen. If this bag weighs 100 pounds and it's made up of 8% nitrogen, that means there's 8 pounds of nitrogen in this bag. Now it's important to understand application rate. That's the number of pounds per 1,000 square feet of lawn you want to apply of nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, NPK. Normally we're going to measure off of nitrogen. In general, you want to apply about 1 to 2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of lawn per year. This 1 to 2 pounds per 1,000 square feet is often going to be spread across 2 applications over the course of the year. We're going to discuss one of those applications now. Assuming we want an application rate of 1 pound per 1,000 square feet of lawn, we take the total number of pounds of nitrogen in the bag and we figure out how many square feet of lawn this entire 100-pound bag would cover. So this entire 100-pound bag would cover 8,000 square feet of lawn with a nitrogen application rate of 1 pound per 1,000 square feet. The problem is most fertilizer is sold in 50-pound bags, not 100-pound bags. The NPK is still going to tell you the percent of NPK regardless of the bag size. You are then going to have to convert that to pounds of NPK. Since this bag now weighs 50 pounds, take half of the nitrogen number, and that tells you how many pounds of nitrogen there are in the 50-pound bag. 8% divided by 2 equals 4 pounds of nitrogen. There was originally 8 pounds of nitrogen in the 100-pound bag, and then this 50-pound bag, that means there's now 4 pounds of nitrogen. Remember, the NPK number listed on the bag is always listed in percent, and most fertilizer is sold in 50-pound bags. It's helpful to think of it in 100-pound bags when you're trying to figure out how many pounds of nitrogen are in that bag. So if you wanted an application rate of 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of lawn, you could cover 4,000 square feet of lawn with this 50-pound bag. If you have a 2,000 square foot lawn and you wanted to apply 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet using this 8-10-10 NPK, you could apply 1/2 of the bag across the entire 2,000 square foot lawn to get your desired 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Let's say your lawn was 3,000 square feet, then you could apply 3/4 of the bag across the entire 3,000 square foot lawn to give you your 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. The second method involves converting the percent nitrogen, or whatever target NPK value you're looking to use, to a decimal format. So 8% nitrogen would be represented as 0.08. If you're looking for a 1 pound per 1,000 square foot application rate, then you would take 1, that's your application rate, divided by the amount of nitrogen in this case, 0.08, and that equals 12.5 pounds of this bag to be spread over 1,000 square feet. That would mean you'd spread 12.5 pounds per each 1,000 square feet to ensure you are applying 1 pound of nitrogen for every 1,000 square feet. So if your lawn is 2,000 square feet, you would apply 25 pounds out of this entire bag. We get 25 pounds by taking 12.5 pounds times 2, since the lawn in this example is 2,000 square feet. or roughly half the bag. If your lawn was 3,000 square feet, you would apply 37.5 pounds, which is 12.5 times 3 out of the entire 50-pound bag to get 3,000 square feet of lawn covered with 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. The third method, which is really just a variation of the second method, is what's known as spoon feeding. This is where you want to slowly apply fertilizer over time instead of applying the normal 1 pound per 1,000 square feet twice a year. Let's say you were looking to apply half a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet application rate 4 times a year. Then you would take 0.5, which would be your desired application rate, divided by 0.08, which would be the decimal format of the percent of nitrogen in the 50-pound bag, and you would get 6.25 pounds out of this entire bag to be spread over 1,000 square feet for each of your 4 applications per year that you would plan to do. So if you wanted to spoon feed in a half a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet to a 3,000 square foot lawn 4 times a year, you would apply 18.75 pounds out of this bag. We get that number by taking 6.25 pounds times 3 to represent a 3,000 square foot lawn out of the 50-pound bag each time you apply.
Let's take a look at what kind of spreader we've got here. Now this is what's called a broadcast spreader. So you open up the door here, that spins around, then it drops the seeds down to this, which spins around and distributes the seeds out. I borrowed this from a friend because it's going to work just fine for what we need it for. Other types of spreaders would be something called a drop spreader, which will have a nice little slat right here in the bottom, and it'll drop a nice even kind of waterfall of seeds across the lawn. And then obviously you've got a hand spreader like I use to distribute much of the grass seed, which is just going to be harder to get the exact quantity and an even laydown of the fertilizer. Okay, here's some of the settings that are on this broadcast spreader. I'm going to be using on about a setting 5. That's what the guy at Site 1 told me would work pretty well for my lawn. And he said anything around that area should work pretty well. Now, it can get pretty complex depending on what you're laying down, and you need to really understand that. But for what I'm doing here with the lawn, I know that a setting of 5 or 6 should work pretty well. Now, other things that this spreader has that's pretty nice is it actually has this edge guard. So what you can do is you can turn it on or off by down here. And what that's going to do is limit how much it sprays. So if you have it on, you see it's going to spray the fertilizer 3 feet. If it's off, it's going to distribute it in a 5-foot pattern out in front of you. This 3-foot pattern will be really nice for if I'm trying to go up against the edge of the driveway or a garden bed or something like that I want to make sure the fertilizer doesn't get inside of. Another consideration when you're putting down the fertilizer is what kind of weather you're going to put it down in. If it's too hot and too sunny, it can really cause an issue with your grass. You probably are going to need to water it in also, but today is an ideal day to put it down because as you can see, it's nice and cloudy out. Now it is hot, but I do have the clouds and it's late in the afternoon, and then I'm going to water it in as soon as we get done, and we should get some rain this evening. All right, so when we're laying the fertilizer, we have to be careful. If we put down too much of the nitrogen on the grass, it's going to burn up the grass. If I don't put enough, then the grass isn't going to get the nutrients it needs to really grow. So be really careful. Make sure you measure it out correctly. Make sure you lay it out evenly at the right application rate per 1,000 feet. Now, because I did the math that I just showed you in that little slideshow, I know that I'm going to put anywhere between 1/2 to about 3/4 of this bag. I'm going to lean more towards the 3/4 of this bag. And I need to spread that evenly across my yard, which is about 2,800 to 3,000 square feet. And that'll give me about a 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet of yard. All right, so I just pulled out about 3/4 of the bag, I thought, and you see I've still got 19.8 pounds left in the bag. So I've got a little bit more to go out of this 50-pound bag. There should be about 12.5 pounds left in order for me to have put 3/4 of the bag in my seed spreader. So now I'm down to just under 16 pounds, and I'm gonna leave it there. I'd rather have a little less than 1 pound per 1,000 square feet than a little more, and I don't want to take the chance of burning up the grass. Now that the fertilizer is laid, comes one of the most important parts. Make sure we water it in so that the fertilizer soaks deep into the soil and gets into the roots of the grass and doesn't end up burning the grass. All right, so that's all I've got for this video. We've got the fertilizer all laid down. We're gonna come back and check in an update video in a couple of weeks and see how everything's taken. Hopefully everything's healthy. I don't have a ton of weeds and the grass is nice and green, and I've had a lot of the seed take. So I'll see you guys then.